Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. This is Emily Croak with Ali Sterling. It looks like lots of people are getting on right now. We will give people another minute or two as everyone's computers are catching up and getting on. So give people a minute or two to hop on, and then we will get started. We'll give people about 30 seconds here, and then we will get going. I still see the number climbing up, so I want to give people just another minute. All right, so I think we are good to go ahead and get started today. Welcome. Thank you all for joining today on this somewhat, at least here in Toledo, a very, very dreary Tuesday. Hopefully it's warmer and sunnier where all of you are, but here it's a little bit gray. So thank you for taking time out of your day to join me and what I hope will be a really interesting and somewhat provocative topic today in a really good way. So my name is Emily Croak, and I'm an advisor with Ali Sterling Philanthropy. I've been with the firm about 2 years now and get to work across our spectrum of service lines. And today we're going to talk about how different generations engage with philanthropy and what their impact is on our industry. I am one of those millennials, the ones that people like to complain about. I think we're doing some good things, but I like to think that I have somewhat of a unique perspective on some of this as one of those up-and-coming generations. So hopefully we'll give all of you today a good idea of how philanthropy is being done differently in organizations and looking to the future, how it needs to be done differently in order for your organization to thrive and to really be ahead of the curve, right? As there's more competition and we're facing increased challenges, the way we approach philanthropy is so important. And I know that's not news to anyone on this webinar, but again, I think one of the key takeaways today will really just be forcing ourselves to look at the way that we've always done things versus the way that we can do things, and having truly just being able to start that conversation with people who are important to your organization. So with that said, I'm going to hop right into it. If you have any technical difficulties, if you can't hear me or something, feel free to find the chat box. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen. We will take questions after the presentation if there's time. If not, I will certainly follow up afterwards. You will have my contact information. Additionally, we will be sending out the PowerPoint afterwards. So if you are one of those people like me who ferociously scrambles notes, you can still do that, but just know that you will have access to this after the fact. So feel free to just listen and take it in, and we will be following up with you after with a recorded version of this and the slides as well. So with that said, just a little bit about my firm, about Ali Sterling. So we've been around for about 12 years now, and we focus in 3 key areas. And the first being fundraising solutions. So everything from campaign management to feasibility studies, anything on that spectrum of how you're bringing funds into your organization with private dollars. And we love our campaign work. We love looking at the different ways campaigns are being done these days. That's going to be a lot of what we talk about today in terms of how different generations are fitting into that. But of our work. Strategic planning is another large piece of this. We love working with nonprofit organizations to plan for the future, to identify what those strategic initiatives are that they should be focusing on as we move into the future, into a new space. And then the third is the board catalyst, and that's truly our focus on your board. As you all know, your board can be your best friend, right? A really good board, and I know they're not always that way. But at the same time, we love going in and helping organizations learn how to leverage their boards for good, how to teach their board members to be the best ambassadors for their organization that they can be. So again, do a lot of work across the country with nonprofits, primarily in these three areas. But now, as philanthropy is starting to change, I think our work is changing somewhat too in a unique way. Nonprofits need new and different things, and so we're here to adapt with that as well. And then just briefly, an idea of the different organizations we work with, everything from healthcare organizations to legal aid societies. You'll see a broad spectrum of our clients right in front of you here, but only to say that we love working across different with different types of organizations in our sector. It gives us the best breadth of knowledge and really some good base for best practices that we can share with all of our clients and with each of you. That's why we love doing these webinar series. We love taking what we learn from all of our incredible clients and giving some of that back so you guys can go out there and make your organizations better. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into our main topic of today. And that is this changing nature of the work that we're doing in philanthropy. And you'll see on here it says taxi or Uber. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I do know that the first thing I do when I land at the airport, whenever I'm traveling for work, which is quite often, is that I open my Uber app and see where the closest car is and order that, and then walk directly to the Uber pickup station that now a lot of airports, a lot of major airports have, which is incredible. And I walk right past the taxi stand where there's normally 10-ish taxis waiting and normally a relatively small line compared to the Uber pickup line. And I like to use this metaphor because it shows the ever-changing time that we're in. And I know there's lots of articles out there about taxi versus Uber. Which one's better? Which one we should be using, right? Which one's the right thing to do? And at the end of the day, we see people have made this shift because of what? Because it's more efficient, because it's quicker, because I feel more safe. I know who's going to pick me up when I'm at the airport. I can see their name and their license plate. I don't have to pull out my credit card or find cash. All of those really simple things that are just a fact in life these days. And when we compare that to the work that we're doing, we look at how we're evolving and the constant need for our organizations to not be the last one left standing, right? No one in our organization should ever ask why we're not evolving with the times. And I'm not saying that any of us need to be the leader on this front, right? We don't have to be out there leading the pack, innovate, trying to innovate just for the sake of it. But we do need to constantly be moving in the right direction. And that's what today is about, is trying to give all of us a better understanding of what that looks like. So what we've called this, and you'll see on here, this is a relatively short PowerPoint because it's the meat of it is all on one slide, which I really like. It's sort of a unique way to do things. But what we're talking about is the campaigns of yesterday versus the campaigns of tomorrow. And how all of our generations interact within those things. So before we jump in, a few caveats. One is that when I say campaign, I'm not talking about capital campaign or endowment campaign necessarily. All I'm talking about is any organized effort to raise money, which every single one of you on this call are doing, or at least have some sort of hand in. So it can be your annual fund. It can truly be anything that people are rallying around to raise funds for the organization. So when we talk about campaign, there should be four main ingredients. One is a start date, of course. Second is a stop date. Third are goals, right? How much do we want to raise? And fourth is we have to have other people involved. So this is going to look different for everyone. This is defined a little bit differently for everyone. But I want you to keep in mind as we're moving through today, and as I refer to the word campaign quite a bit, that means what you need it to mean for your organization. It doesn't mean that you're in this huge $15 million campaign to build a new building. It means that it's meeting you wherever you're at right now in your philanthropic efforts. The second thing I'll say is that this was intentionally meant to be provocative. So what we're going to go over today, it's a little bit best practice, it's a little bit some tested information, some research that we've seen come out recently, and other things are things that we're hearing from people out there in the field doing it, like each of you. But on the other hand, we are showing both extremes, right? The reality is that most of our organizations are probably somewhere right in the middle. Right? We're doing a little bit of the tried and true, the old school, if you will, way of fundraising or way of running our fundraising programs because it works, right? We're not saying a lot of these things don't work because they do. We're just saying that you have to start testing that theory. We have to start challenging ourselves. We have to at least start the conversation. So we'll go through a little bit of what that looks like today. So before we jump right in, I want to share this quote with each of you because it's one that we really like, and I'll read it really quick. It says, "It's clear that traditional fundraising tactics are faltering. Many groups recognize this, but they often don't know how to change the course and don't have the money to experiment. Facing enormous pressure to produce big dollar results today, they put aside concerns about tomorrow. They are like the proverbial frog in the pot of water, slowly heating up to a boil. They may not realize the danger until it's too late." Now, if we were all in a room together and I asked you to raise your hands, I think a lot of you would raise your hands that you feel this way. You feel a little bit stuck because we can't always go out there and innovate and experiment and try crazy new things because we have to make sure that our organizations can still operate, that we can still turn the lights on, that we can still do our provide the services that we're providing and open and do all the things we're expected to do on a daily basis. But looking back, is that all we can do? Or are we in this time where we're forced to start thinking ahead? As we know, I'm sure most of you have heard the statistics, a new nonprofit is created in the United States every 15 minutes. And I don't think that's shocking at this point because, as all of you know, competition is greater than ever. There are so many organizations doing very similar missions, all of which are doing this incredible work. But we're now faced more than ever with this decision from our donors saying, are you going to give to them or to us or to another organization? And what does that differentiator look like for you? Why would a donor decide to give to you versus another organization doing like-minded work? So it's something to think about as we talk about these extremes, is what can we really not afford to do anymore? We have to start taking risks to some extent. And we'll talk more about that whole risk piece today. But truly, when we're looking at how different generations engage in philanthropy, so much of it is the mindset that we will take on as an organization, the work that we will commit to do to start moving forward. So with that said, we're going to jump right into our main slide today. We'll spend most of our time here working through this. And again, we'll take questions at the end. So if you have any, feel free to keep them in your mind as we go through today. But I'm going to get started with the first one. So we're going to walk through these comparisons again, provocative. So think about where you might fall within the spectrum on each of these different topics that we'll talk about today. So the first thing we'll talk about is yesterday's campaign of capital projects and BandAids versus systemic solutions, both disruptive and social impact. I think somewhat gone are the days of the brick and mortar projects. And more with my clients, we see donors that aren't nearly as interested in having their name on a building as they are in making a huge change. Donors today want to impact change. They want to see how far their dollars that they are giving to your organization, how far they're going, what that impact looks like, what you're doing with that money, how you're stewarding those dollars. So, years ago, and still somewhat now, we see all of these still. We're just slowly moving away from them. A new hospital, we'd raise $50 million to help build a new hospital, and donors were so excited about being a part of that and about getting their name on the building. And the other piece to this is that a lot of those things were Band-Aids to a problem, right? So whether we're thinking about a building or we're thinking about a campaign that any nonprofit has done to some extent, if you are a food pantry, and you have a campaign so you can provide more services, you can feed more hungry people. Are we putting a Band-Aid on that problem of hunger? Or can we do something to help solve the problem of hunger? Why are people hungry? Why are people in our community hungry? What can our community do better to combat this problem? What can our organization do to combat the problem? So now we're seeing some really innovative organizations who are looking at those systemic issues. And they're looking at the ways that they, as an organization, can start making change and leading the way in terms of that change. So instead of saying, we're going to build a new hospital, they're saying, maybe we should look at what's making people sick in the first place. And what work can we do to combat that? So it's a really interesting time because it's a totally different way of selling your organization. And all of our organizations have this because all of you are out there doing work that needs to be done for your community. You have these incredible missions and you're really, really helping people. But what are those underlying root cause issues? So it forces us to change our case, right? We have to change our story. Now, not only do we want to feed the hungry, we want to help solve the problem of hunger. And boy, oh boy, that's a whole different conversation, right? We have to articulate not only a different part of the piece of that mission, because it always is still mission aligned, but you have to get buy-in from all sides of this, right? It starts at the top, the buy-in with the board and your constituents and truly everyone that comes into contact with your organization. But when we're looking at these systemic solutions, we also have a much higher risk of failure. So it might not appeal to every single donor that you're coming in contact with by any means. Some donors a lot of donors want to give money. They want to see that money used in a good way to further your programs and to further your mission, and then that's good. But there are other donors, a growing pool of donors, that are looked at more like investors. They are willing to invest in something that is more high risk if there's the possibility of a higher payoff, right? If we really have the chance to move forward, to move the needle when it comes to true change in our communities, there's a growing group of people who want to be a part of that, who are willing to give bigger dollars, even with that sense of higher risk, in order for the possibility of what could come with that. So I urge you to start having these conversations internally with your staff leadership or with your board as you sort of figure out what that looks like for you. Because again, this isn't something that overnight we can say, all right, we're going to go solve hunger. But it is something where we can say, are we doing everything we can to make the greatest impact we can within our communities, whatever that looks like for you. The second piece of this is the treadmill. So every 3 to 5 years, like it or not, versus mindset-driven and constant modality. So a lot of nonprofits are and were used to doing the same thing every few years. So we'd be revving up for a campaign, we'd be in campaign mode, then we'd be in stewardship mode with a little downtime, and then we go right back up again, all to do the same thing. Because campaign meant big money, right? And that's when the big money came into your organization. It didn't come in at any other time necessarily. We wanted to get those dollars in during the campaign, and you have your routine, right? Like on a treadmill. Now we're seeing more successful organizations who are constantly in campaign mode, who are driven by this campaign mindset. meaning there is always a reason to ask donors to invest in our organization. There's always urgency behind that ask. So urgency is a huge part of being in this campaign mindset. We're constantly looking for the next thing. And we'll talk a little bit today about major giving versus micro giving. And micro giving is something else that we're seeing a lot more of. Instead of having a $5 million or a $3 million or a $1 million campaign every 3 years, instead we're looking at how we can package smaller things, right? If there's a program for $100,000 that we can package and sell that, just like you would in a campaign, just like you would in your case for support. How can we bring in donors to that cause? So organizations are seeing a lot of success with that because A, it helps donors feel like they're making a quick impact, right? If there's something that you want to fund, even for $25,000, and you can bring in 5 donors at $5,000 a piece, you can easily communicate that impact, right? Because we can quickly turn around, implement, and show how those dollars were used and stewarded. That's what donors want to see, and that's what they want to be a part of. So if we can package these smaller programs or what have you, and make them easy to relate to and align with our donors' missions, it's a lot more successful in a lot of cases than just doing a huge campaign every 3 to 5 years. Again, organizations tend to be moving away from that because we are in this mode of more competition and more need. And the urgency behind those draws people in. And in order to keep our donors well aligned with our mission and with the work we're doing, it's a great way to say, hey, look at how far your dollars have gone. And if my $5,000 can be a part of a $25,000 package, right, or program, versus my $5,000 being in a $5 million campaign, I feel like my money went a lot further because it was something smaller, but it was immediately implemented, and I made a higher impact. And with these middle donors that we're seeing a lot more of now, people want to see that. I can't make a $1 million gift by any means, but my $5,000 can go far when it's something smaller. So think about how your organization can start to package programs and different needs for your organization differently. It's simply a different way of thinking, but no way is the wrong way. The next piece is the usual suspects versus diversity, gender, generation, and ethnicity. So this is an interesting one because we're in this unique time where, we're working across 5 generations for the first time in history. And the people that we and your organizations have relied on to be annual donors, right? We all have those donors that they've given $10,000 the last 20 years, and we rely on those dollars, right? The absence of those would be noticed, but they're aging out to some extent and even starting to pass away, unfortunately, in some situations. Those people that we once relied on aren't necessarily there anymore. So what we're forced to do in a great way, and we should have been thinking about this a long time ago, is we're relying on engaging their children. We're relying on engaging different groups of people that we never have before. Females, young people, different ethnicities, all of these untapped potentials that we just haven't given enough time to before. Because we used to think that we should just spend the most time on the people with the biggest dollars. If I knew that you had high capacity, then I would spend most of my time cultivating and stewarding you and others like you, which has resulted in the absence of a middle donor. So now what we're seeing and what we're encouraging more than ever is to start bringing families into these conversations. And there's research that came out recently that said older generations and high net worth donors in older generations have not done a good job of engaging their children in philanthropy. Truly, and it's as basic as that. Like, they really just haven't taught their children the importance of philanthropy. So now nonprofits are doing some really unique things where they're starting to learn how to engage younger family members or donors or people, right? Young professionals. And they have different activities or groups or societies where young people can come be a part of the organization on a smaller scale, so they simply learn what it's like to give and to be involved with a nonprofit. Because we've gone so many years largely without the absence of that, we're at a really critical time where we have to really look at all of these different segments of people, right? Females need, as opposed to men, females need more of a why behind their giving. A lot of research and data points to that they want more of a specific why. They want to know more details. So how is our organization adapting to that? What are we doing to make sure that our female audience is understanding and receiving the information they need to feel like they are making a well-informed decision on their giving? Different ethnicities, so Asian or African-American backgrounds, they are primed and ready to give. Research shows that they want to give. They might give differently. They might give through different methods than the traditional Caucasian male, all of which are good things. But is our organization doing what we can to appeal to that, right? We're all looking for different messages, and it's up to us as an organization to really adapt to that and to segment our prospect lists and our donor lists and say, are we communicating to this group of people in the way that they prefer? And there's a lot of really good research out there right now that can help you do that, because it really is showing, those groups that want more technology, right? Millennial will not be happy if you send them a bunch of letters or things in the mail because it's killing trees. So they want to be more email driven, whereas older generations might not want to be. And every single segment of the audiences that you could be speaking to or being in front of require these different things. So it's up to you to start those conversations and to look at how we need to start really packaging our message and how we need to start really specifying our communications as we move forward. The next is I won't wake up for less than 7 figures versus microgiving that leverages and sustains. I touched briefly on this one already, but essentially the old way of doing this said that if there was a dollar sign above your head that did not meet a certain mark that warranted cultivation, you weren't worth getting up for. And that's a very harsh way of saying it, because of course our donors are worth getting up for, but ultimately we spent so much time focusing on these super high net worth donors that now we have a totally absent era of the middle donor. They're nowhere to be found. So what organizations are doing now is focusing on that micro giving that we talked about, giving in smaller amounts. When you look at my generation, the millennials, I can't make a major gift right now. No, hopefully some people in my generation can, but the important part is we'll get there. But if you're not spending time cultivating and stewarding us now, what's going to make me want to give a major gift to your organization when I do have that capacity a few years down the road? It's all about what we're doing now to meet people where they're at. I might give you a $500 gift now, which could turn into a $500,000 gift down the line. I'm willing to make stretch gifts, especially millennials. You'll see a lot of protest giving. Actually, all generations, really. We're seeing now in this time of the Me Too movement and immigration and all of that, we are willing to make gifts that previously have never been made before because they weren't warranted. But those gifts are there. And if we spend time focusing on, again, that message and that packaging, we can really focus on cultivating and stewarding that middle donor, which will eventually become a bigger donor. Hopefully, right? The next thing is traditional org chart versus, so chairs and co-chairs, versus initiative-based and cohort-driven. So this is when we're talking a little bit more about a standard campaign, a capital campaign or an endowment campaign. In the past and really right now, we haven't seen a ton of movement away from this, and I'll tell you why in a second. But leadership is still the #1 most important thing when it comes to any campaign. So we're still seeing chairs and co-chairs and steering committees and campaign cabinets. They're absolutely critical to the success of a campaign. But what we're seeing more now is leadership done somewhat differently when a case warrants it. So I have a client right now who they're doing a $35 million campaign, and they've split it into $5 million buckets. And so each one of those $5 million buckets is going to a different program for the organization or something, going to fund something different. So what they've done is they've broken that down from a $35 million campaign into $5 million buckets, each with their own leadership. So each bucket has their own chair that's well aligned with that bucket, which, if you think about it, makes a whole heck of a lot more sense than it does to have one chair over this huge $35 million campaign. It helps with accountability. It helps leverage that leadership, right? It helps get more people involved in what they're actually interested in. Because like most campaigns now, they're multifaceted. We might be doing a partial capital build and then have a piece that's going to some sort of endowment or a piece for some sort of technology. Why are we not aligning people and leaders and potential volunteers with what they might be most interested in to then attract like-minded people who also can help drive those initiatives? So I like this one in here because although we haven't strayed too much from the traditional way of doing things, I think it drives home the importance of leadership and the importance of doing things that are right for your organization, even if it's not the standard way of doing things. It forces you to think outside of the box at how you could run a campaign. When it comes to your annual appeal, is it structured like a campaign? Do you have a start and an end date and goals? And do you have leaders and volunteer fundraisers that are helping you get there? Because if you don't, it's something interesting to think about as we move forward to try and reach different unique audiences. The next thing is CEO as 30-70 versus CEO as 70-30. And this is an interesting one, and I'll preface this one by saying not everyone can pull this off, but it forces you to think about the way things could be done in a very unique way. I've seen, and I have one client that does this very successfully, where their CEO spends the majority of his time fundraising, 70 to 80% of his time specifically. So when they hired him and he came on board under the premise and under the understanding that he would spend that majority of his time out there meeting with donors. Because at the end of the day, high net worth donors want to give to the CEO, right? They want to give to someone who's the face of the organization. And he knew that in order to be successful, he needed to be out there meeting with donors and not spending his time in meetings. So when he came on board, they also brought on board a COO who truly drives strategic initiative, does all the things that a typical CEO might do, but the roles have been swapped a little bit. A lot of organizations don't even have their CEO or executive director or whomever spend even 30% of their time on fundraising. And that's something to take a look at immediately if you can. A quick takeaway would be to truly look at the ability and the availability of your CEO or executive director to go out there and be the face of your fundraising program. People want to give to the people who are leading your organization. That's a natural inclination. And who can speak better to your organization than the person at the helm? So if there's a way to allow or free up time for your CEO to be out there representing your organization from a fundraising perspective, absolutely do it. You have to hire for fundraising. And for those of you who might be looking for a new executive director or will be in the near future, it's something to think about. It should be one of the top 2 things that this person spends their time on. That is how much of a priority fundraising should be for someone in that role. And we have to be proactive about it, just like anything else. But it's interesting because it's one of those very slowly shifting the culture. Because when you go in and talk to your board and say, we want our CEO to go be out in front of donors 80% of his time or her time, they're going to look at you funny I would guess. And for those who are on board immediately, more power to you. But it is one of those culture shifts. And it's one of those things that takes time, and you have to give it the time it deserves to really help people understand how important that is. But once you can make that case, it will make a difference for your organization. The next thing is community-led and place-based versus no boundaries. And this is one of my favorites because this is something that we're seeing. A lot of my clients are coming to understand the importance of this now. And that is that before, we were so focused on where people were located, on people who were exactly where we were, reaching out to those people, and we sort of stayed in our little bubbles. And then years ago, universities started and more assertive organizations going to a person's happy place. I have a client that spends a week down in Naples, Florida every February. They have a huge constituency down there. So they meet their donors. They have a week where they have some events and donor meetings, and they truly just go to the place that their donors are happiest. Because I promise you, donors are not happiest in Toledo, Ohio in February. It's very cold. So going to a place that's warm and sunny and where people are happy, what an amazing thing for your organization to do. And again, this looks different to every organization depending on where you have donors. But the key is that we start thinking outside of our small circles, right? Outside of just those in our community. Fundraisers don't have to be based where your organization is. I have another client right now who they're hiring regional fundraisers who are located outside of their footprint to truly grow their presence in communities other than their own. Now, the people outside of these communities truly have no idea who this organization is, so we know we're not going to bring in big dollars, right away. But what these people are there to do is to raise awareness and to spread the mission. So eventually that footprint can grow. So ultimately what we're just looking at is how we can grow our organization on a larger scale, how we're spreading our mission in unique ways. But a lot of that is by going to people instead of expecting that everyone who could be beneficial to our organization is right here where we are. The next is monthly in-person meetings and reporting out versus concierge-based and culturally customized. So this is a big one now too, as I have a lot of campaign clients who are in the phase of needing to schedule campaign cabinet meetings and really have a focus on that accountability and that check-in piece. And the number one thing I'll say about this, accountability is key no matter how you do it. We have to be sure that we're holding our volunteer fundraisers and ourselves accountable to our goals. But no longer do we necessarily need to do that through hosting monthly meetings. Reporting out isn't really beneficial to anyone when we could have really covered it in an email. Are we using our meetings for more of a robust discourse? Are we using our meetings to brainstorm and innovate and challenge in a good way? And don't get me wrong, meetings are still important, right? We all have things we have to cover. But are we doing or hosting our meetings in a way that are truly most valuable to everyone who's sitting around the table? And when we come to concierge-based and culturally customized, it's really just looking at how different generations want to be communicated with. Now I've seen some successful clients who, I had one who was in the middle of a campaign, and volunteer fundraisers were very high profile individuals, and they weren't making their donor calls. They weren't reaching out to prospects like they had on their list that they always have. So the major gift officer said, would you let me email them on behalf of you and make the introduction and set that meeting? Talk about concierge, right? That is the service. That's incredible, an incredible thing for you to do for your volunteers. And B, it's that accountability piece. So it's keeping everything moving, but in a different way. Most people wouldn't think to do that. And most people wouldn't think about how different generations want to work. How someone who's retired may want to or need to spend their time versus someone who's in the middle of a crazy work life and raising kids and all of that. All of those look different. So maybe it's having a meeting in person one month, but the next month you're doing an individual check-in call. That's 15 minutes with each member of your cabinet or with each member of your development team or your development committee from your board. Again, it all looks different, but all things to consider. The next thing is cash and individual donor focused versus equity, family office, and cause marketing, or corporate social responsibility. So when it comes to this, the main takeaway here is that no longer are people individually making hiring decisions. Now we see that there are so many more parties involved, right? Whether it's a community foundation or a wealth advisor or parents and kids or grandparents or a family foundation. Not rarely, but we're seeing more and more the presence of more parties when it comes to making an ask or asking someone to make a gift to the organization. So how are we shifting to help them make those giving decisions in a more succinct way, right? How are we presenting our case so that each of these different parties feels well aligned to our mission and to our cause? And when it comes to things like corporate social responsibility, we're seeing this shift in how corporations are dealing with this as well, right? Especially when we're looking at different generations. Younger generations, millennials, they're more attracted to companies who give, who have a consistent giving program, who have a really succinct way of saying, this is what we're giving back to the community, and here's how you can be a part of it. So this is a little bit of a vague one, but I think it's going to be much more important as we move forward, how, again, we are segmenting our messaging for different audiences and how we're bringing all those people into the conversation from the very beginning. Because that's what we should be thinking about doing, is getting all the parties in the room right away to make sure everyone's on the same page and well aligned with our mission and where we're going. The next thing is one-on-one asks versus one-on-one asks. Thankfully, some things do not change. And the way we see it, this is one that will not change for the foreseeable future, if ever. There is simply nothing that can replace meeting with someone and cultivating a meaningful relationship, which is great because I assume all of you on this call are doing what you're doing because you love people and you love to cultivate those relationships. So as much as technology can take over any one of the world or any one of our careers or how we work, it will not change how we meet with donors and how we cultivate those relationships. You know, every once in a while we get someone that says, well, I secured a $100,000 gift through email. They told me, I got an email that said I'm making a huge gift. And all I can say is, I don't think it started that way, right? They might have confirmed through email, but chances are that you spent a lot of time with these individuals and these people. I haven't yet heard of a story where someone has logged onto your website and checked the other box for making a $50,000 or $100,000 gift, because we're not moving in that direction, and that is something that is great to see because we don't ever want that piece of our work to be replaced. The next thing is investing without soul versus socially responsible investments. This is another thing that I see changing with generations specifically. Older generations, a lot of the time, made gifts because you made a gift to my campaign, so now I owe you. Or you're my friend or my colleague, so will you write a check today? And it was sort of more of a business deal. Or an IOU, and not in a bad way, right? Because all money coming into our organization is such a good thing. But now we're seeing that people want a reason to give to your organization. They want to really feel like they're a part of that mission. They want to know that their money is being stewarded well. This is something that we're seeing more than ever, is how well-informed donors are and how well-informed they want to continue to be. They want to know how those dollars are being stewarded. They want to know exactly what you're doing with their money. And they want you to report back to them, right? They don't just want to guess or have to go look for it themselves. Reach out, tell them how those funds are being stewarded, tell them how your organization is being a good, fiscally responsible part of the community. All of those things are mattering more and more to the up and coming generations as we're seeing so many more nonprofits and again, so much more competition. That's a great differentiator right there, is telling and communicating back how you're stewarding those funds. So the next thing is stewardship, walls and lists versus experiences and next gen. So one of the big things, I like this because I don't think donor walls will ever go away, right? And lists will always be there. We will always, stewardship is always has been and will continue to be, to an even greater extent, such an important part of the donor life cycle, right? And I think although recognition is changing, it will continue to be important. So do I think that people necessarily need to see their name on a wall in a new library? Maybe not as much as they would have in previous generations, but do most people love to see their name on a building? Of course, right? Because you are so proud to have been a part of that. But how we're recognizing is going to continue to shift, right? And how younger generations want to be recognized will continue to shift. So I think a lot of that is having a conversation, right? So talk to people who are close to your organization. Talk to donors from different generations and say, how do you want to be recognized, right? How can we really make sure that you feel as though we value you as a donor and as a person who's well aligned with our organization? With that said, what we're seeing now is really unique ways to bring new donors or prospects or whomever into the organization. I have a client who's a hospital system, and what they use is they have experiential learning. So what they do for high net worth donors, so this is typically donors of $100,000 or more, they let them come and shadow a doctor for a surgeon for an afternoon. So they get to spend 4 hours shadowing, and they get to see surgery, sit in on surgery. They get to see the doctors at the patient's bedside. And time again, people come out of these experiences absolutely blown away. Not necessarily at the fact that they just got to see a cool surgery, but at the fact that they saw how compassionate and caring these doctors are. And think about how you can apply that to your organization. What experiences can you give people? And this can be a part of stewardship, right? This can be after someone has made a huge gift and you want to say, hey, let me show you really what we're doing every day. We found, and it's an interesting question to talk with your board about, that our boards and the people closest to our organization, so high net worth prospects or donors, don't always know the extent of the work that we're doing within the organization. So what experiences can you create that will help people feel as if they truly know the ins and the outs of what you're doing? And how can you help them feel so closely aligned to your mission that it's absolutely a no-brainer of when they give, it's just how much, right? Because we want them to know how valued they are. So a great way to do that is simply by asking, and again, it will depend on the generation. So we have to just start that conversation. Oh, the next one is themes. This is an interesting one as well. I think that all of us have probably been a part of or seen a campaign that has the word legacy in it, right? So legacy of a generation, or hope is healing, or more of those generic themes. Not a bad thing at all. But what we're seeing now is how much words matter. We're seeing more when it comes to protest giving. We're seeing more when it comes to different ways, again, to package and sell whatever we're raising money for. People are less concerned about that word legacy than they are about making an impact now, right? With all of the crazy things going on in the world, we see people get turned away at the border or what have you. So people want to go give to that because they see it happening right now. and it's in our faces. And with all that our generations and our world is faced with, right, we have so much incoming at all times. We're always overstimulated. We want to give to what's going to make the biggest impact at this certain place in time. So although legacy is so important, and although it's so important to look at the long-term sustainability of our organizations, and many donors do understand that, and we're seeing more and more that donors like endowments, right? Because they like to see their dollars go further. What we're saying in this is that you have to think about how you are talking about what you're raising money for. That urgency is so important. The meaning behind what you're doing is so important. That's why we saw such a surge in these organizations who supported the Me Too movement, who support immigration and all of these big social impact causes, because we're making that immediate impact. And each one of your organizations can do that as well. It's all about how you package that and how you share that and align that with your donors. The next thing is blanket prospecting and communication versus AI. I know what you ate for breakfast. Sort of jokingly, but I really do think our phones sometimes know what we ate for breakfast. So gone are the days of being able to send a letter that says, "Dear friend, we hope that you," right? And we're talking about our organization. Now segmenting and targeting our communications is so, so, so important. Like I mentioned earlier, millennials probably don't want to get a bunch of letters in the mail talking about your organization. But if you can catch my attention with some sort of visually stunning email that sets you apart, that shows me some sort of impact and really urgent need for your organization, I'll probably click it open. But it's up to each of you to really start honing in on what your prospect or donor lists look like and how you're going to segment those and what each segmented list or generation or however you're doing it, how they need to be communicated with. And then AI, obviously, I know what you ate for breakfast. This is just interesting because we know so much more about our donors, right? I know the other day I made a gift to an organization through Instagram, and then within 10 minutes I had like 3 different ads for different nonprofits, very similar missions, but all different organizations asking me to donate now. So technology is so smart. It's how we can use that to best reach our constituents that can be, again, another good differentiator for our organization. The next is board will open doors, hopefully, versus boards as influencers and venture capitalists. Now, this one might be more on the extreme, because I know a lot of you are probably rolling your eyes saying, I don't think so. I'm lucky if I can get my board to come to a board meeting. But what we're saying with this, our boards are your most natural ambassadors. They should be influencing, and they are influencing via their own channels, right? All that looks differently to all of them. I think gone are the days of us sort of saying, you know, our board needs to do X, Y, and Z. But more so, we have to ask our boards how they want to be involved in the organization, how they want to add value in their own way. Because some will be out there making asks with us and trying to bring in dollars, but others want to be more behind the scenes. And it's okay for us to ask those questions. Now, boards of the future are really looking to be influencers and venture capitalists, right? So really what we're looking for is those risk takers, those people who you can go to when you come up with a new idea or when you leave a webinar like this and say, I think we really need to start looking at this. And they say, you know what, we are willing to take on that challenge or that risk for the greater good, right? Because we have to try. At some point, we have to be able to step outside of our comfort zone and say, yes, this is worth it for our organization. And I think boards have a long way to go to get there. But you can at least start that conversation of saying, what risks might we be willing to take as a board or as an organization when it comes down to it, to really differentiate us and to really push the needle forward as it relates to our mission. And the last piece on here is technology if you insist versus a deal breaker. So I think this one is obvious, but really I we can do what we do, any of us, without technology. But with that said, we can't take shortcuts. So, we're seeing more giving through social media platforms, through Facebook and Instagram. But it's sort of one of those buyer beware things, right? Because we're not getting all that donor information necessarily, and they're not giving directly to our organization. So how are we using technology to really the best extent that we can? And a lot of that's just researching what looks best for your organization, right? Maybe on Giving Tuesday, instead of having them give through Facebook, where it goes to that foundation, we direct them back to our own website so we know that they're giving directly to us, or what have you. So again, it looks different to every organization, but technology is such a critical piece that we just want to make sure we're doing it correctly so we can retain and really make sure that we have those donors moving forward. So with that said, that's this whole page. We have a few minutes left, so I'm going to get through these next couple minutes. But like I mentioned in the beginning, and for those who weren't on, we had a couple people hop on midway through. It's intentionally meant to be provocative and intentionally meant to help you think differently about your work. You can't go implement all these things, right? But what you can do is take away one or two things that you say, maybe we start working towards this, or maybe we start having these conversations. So how does this impact our work? Like I've mentioned, truly, it's about letting yourself question the status quo and letting yourself question your organization's role in where you're going from a fundraising and philanthropic perspective. I want you all to encourage among your boards and among your leadership teams this robust discovery on what all of this means to you. Because again, it looks so different, but there's such incredible possibility for each of you that you have to at least be willing to have those conversations. So one of the things, a few questions to contemplate to get you all started. And again, I'll be sending this out afterwards, so don't feel like you have to write all these down, but they are good ones. So number one, how do these shifts impact your work or strategic initiatives? Big one, right? So that's an easy one to talk about with your board. What I recommend sometimes is take one question to each board meeting, right? And have that be your opening with your board meeting, and just set a timer for 10 minutes and let your board talk, right? Talk about some of these things. Let them dream, let them brainstorm on this, and do the same with your internal teams. The second is, what opportunity does this create to engage differently with multiple generations, diverse communities, and leaders in unique ways, right? So a little bit of what we talked about, but how does this look specifically in your own community, among your own business and nonprofit leaders? Can this help to create any collaborative partnerships, right? We can't do things alone necessarily, but is the future looking to partner with others who are doing like-minded work? Third is, how can your organization start to shift your mindset and current practices? And fourth is, what resources will be required to be successful within a new campaign mindset? So again, most of these aren't immediate fixes, but they are things that you can at least start that conversation, because resources are required, right? And especially when we're doing higher risk things that can really help catapult our organization into new and exciting territory, we have to be willing to make that investment at times. So with that said, that brings us to the end of today, and a couple things. So this PowerPoint will be available on our website. It's alliesterling.com. If you click on the 2019 webinar series at the top of the home page, you'll find this webinar, so you can go in there and download this. So feel free to use this as you really start to explore these questions. I think I only see one question on here. How have the new tax laws impacted how the 5 generations are giving? Excuse me. Interestingly enough, we haven't actually seen much change from the new tax laws or implications from that. We know it was sort of a panicked thing and then really calmed down. So we really haven't seen too much at all variance based on those laws, which is a good thing. People are still giving. They're just giving in really unique ways, as we know, right? So dollars aren't necessarily just dollars in anymore. They're coming through unique avenues. So we've just been watching those sort of shifts happen. And because I want to be cognizant of time, I think we are out of time. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to stay on and message me, or my email is emily@alliesterling.com. Always feel free to reach out. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we will touch base soon. So everyone have a great rest of your day.